Cultivating Food Cultures of the Future by Jessica, Elise, and Jack. The objectives of this presentation is to create connections across cultures and understand how food production leads into food consumption. These two different processes both impact our lives and the values we are learning in very different ways, but are still very related. Food production is also changing to be more sustainable, and this presentation looks toward the future of cultivation and how food is in our lives. We also wanted to highlight the importance of food production and consumption in maintaining cultural identity and teaching social standards, especially from a young age. Lastly, we really wanted to look at what do foodscapes of the future look like, taking traditional practices and techniques and modernizing them to create a brighter future ahead. We will outline these connections through discussing hydroponics and sustainability, cultivation methods in the Midwest and India, and cultivation to consumption and the impact of the United States mealtime habits on childhood development.
Hydroponic gardening is a method of gardening through which no soil is needed. The plants receive nutrients through sand, gravel, or liquid in which the ideal concentration of nutrients is added to a solution, then given to the plants. Hydroponic gardening is far more efficient and better for the environment, but is not used to its full potential because hydroponic systems are very expensive alone, without accounting for the equipment or the crops themselves. There are many benefits to this way of gardening. The most prominent being that hydroponics is far more efficient than normal farming, as well as hydroponic gardening is much better for the environment because of the elimination of potentially harmful chemicals. Finally, there is no need to rely on the weather for the success of the crops, as hydroponics can be done indoors. As mentioned in the last slide, there are multiple benefits of hydroponics, including hydroponic gardens are more efficient, they have higher yields, and they are also better for the environment. How can a hydroponic garden produce more crops? There are a few ways in which hydroponics is more efficient than normal farming. Hydroponics makes much better use of water, up to 90% more efficient use of water than farming, and the ratio of area to products in hydroponic gardens is significantly higher than that of conventional farming. Finally, the crops grow faster than in soil, in light of the fact that in soil, plants do not receive nutrients constantly like they do in hydroponics. In a study of the production of lettuce in Arizona, both the yields and the energy required to grow lettuce were compared, and the results were much in favor of hydroponic gardens. The yields of both methods of agriculture were measured in kilograms per meter squared per year. The yields from the hydroponic garden were on average 41 kilograms per meter squared per year, with a maximum of 47 and a minimum of 35. These results were then compared to the results of traditional agriculture, which had an average of only 4 kilograms per meter squared per year. The average of hydroponic production of lettuce was about 10 times that of conventional agriculture in the same area. In addition to the amount of lettuce produced by both methods, the amount of water used was also studied and compared. As stated on the last slide, the amount of water that was needed was also studied and compared. According to the researchers, the area on which these two results were obtained was comparable in size, and hydroponics used significantly less water than conventional agriculture. The amount of water was measured in liters per kilogram of lettuce per year. The water demand for the hydroponic garden was on average only 20 liters per kilogram per year, opposed to the 250 liters per kilogram per year demanded by conventional agriculture, which is about 13 times less water demanded by hydroponics. Along with decreased water usage and more product, the time that it takes plant to grow in hydroponics can be reduced by 30 to 50%, which could potentially save up to 2 weeks of growing time. The science behind this is simple. The plants are directly receiving nutrients and do not have to use energy to obtain nutrients naturally, which would use the energy that the plant could have used to put towards growth. Another reason that faster growth is beneficial to the plant is that if there is anything wrong with the plant, it will be visible sooner, and therefore can be addressed sooner, and the overall health and success of the plant will be guaranteed by hydroponics. Along with being much faster and producing better results compared to conventional farming, hydroponics is far better for the environment and humans by eliminating the use of potentially harmful chemicals. Pesticides play a huge role in today's agricultural world and even in the economy. Through food directly is not the only way that pesticides can impact the environment. Chemicals added to the environment can affect surface water, groundwater, and even soil fertility through a few different ways. From a study of water samples, 90% of all water and fish samples from streams often contain more than one pesticide. That is just from minor streams. Pesticides can reach these water sources mainly through runoff, if there was any treated plants or soil in the area. Evidence of pesticides were found in every sample of water from major rivers. Even in bodies of water that are not streams or rivers, there are evidence of 40 total pesticides or herbicides found in the waters of the Puget Sound Basin, 23 pesticides and 17 herbicides. The similarities between hydroponics and traditional agriculture are very evident, but they also have their differences. Sustainability and food production are both huge points of focus for both of these methods of farming. But hydroponics right now is a more sustainable alternative to conventional farming. And in the near future, we could see a changing of what is considered traditional agriculture in the farming world.
In my research, I compared the cultivation practices of the Midwest and India. In the Midwest, there's a lot of cultivation practices used. A very common one is crop rotation, where they switch the crop they grow out seasonally. So one season they would grow corn and the next they would grow soybeans. This helps stop nutrient soil depletion, and this is a very common practice with commercial farmers. An unsustainable practice used in the Midwest includes overuse of fertilizers, specifically nitrogen fertilizers. When it is overused on the land, it goes into the water from nearby streams, lakes, and rivers. This harms the water quality, making it undrinkable and harming wildlife. Another unsustainable practice used is during the off-season of growing, the topsoil is completely exposed to the weather. This topsoil erosion is a major problem in the Midwest because topsoil is very important to growing crops, which is why more nutrients have to be used as fertilizers. When the topsoil gets washed away, it's gone forever. An easy fix to this is planting cover crops during the off-season so that the soil isn't eroded as fast. We estimate that around 46% of the area of farm fields in the Midwest have completely lost their topsoil. Thaler, Larson, and Q, 2018. India uses many cultivation practices because there are lots of small farms, medium farms, and large farms throughout. Jam and bun cultivation are more towards small to medium farms. They're both very common practices used. Both of them include cutting down all the vegetation in that area and burning it. Jam then just plants the crops right on top of that, and bun cultivation puts soil on top, making a bun. Both of these methods can be sustainable and unsustainable because they use this dried vegetation that they burn as the fertilizer for the plants. But when they use these cultivation practices, they can only cultivate the land for 1 to 3 years. Then there's an off period of up to 20 years where the land is unusable. In India, fertilizers are used. When farmers but they also use nitrogen fertilizers and organic fertilizers. Organic fertilizers are better for the environment and create less water quality problems. When farmers do not have access to the organic fertilizer, they rely on unsustainable use of nitrogen fertilizers. As Pandy and Daiwan found, that 1 unit increase of non-availability of manicure and other organic fertilizers causes 34 units increase in fertilizer use intensity. 2020. India and the Midwest have a lot of things in common, but they also have a lot of differences. Both of them are agriculturally based countries. The Midwest is a powerhouse of agriculture for the United States, helping with major exports and the economy. 70% of India's population relies on agriculture too. In the Midwest, farming is dominated by males. But in India, agriculture is more likely to be run by a female. Only 11% of Midwest farmers hired more than 4 workers for their farm, whereas in India, a large farm usually has 7 to 9 permanent farm workers. In my research from the data, I found that each of these countries was either economically based or production based. In the Midwest, a high percentage of farmers don't believe in climate change or don't believe that climate change affects the long-term use of their farm. They use lots of nitrogen fertilizers, releasing nitrogen into the atmosphere and harming biolife when leaked into the waterways. India strives to produce enough food for their families and their countries because more of the population relies on agriculture to sustain them. There's a lot of relevance in learning about the different sustainable and unsustainable cultivation practices and comparing the Midwest to India. Crops are a major export in the United States, and they play a large role in the economy. Without large-scale agriculture, there would not be enough food produced to feed the world. And as the world population continues to grow, more food is needed and more sustainable methods are also needed. Comparing techniques of India and the Midwest is a great way to learn how other places have sustainable or unsustainable practices and can give ideas to farmers here in the Midwest or anywhere about different practices to use. How the Midwest farms their land affects our water quality here in the Midwest. The anthropological approach I took to my research was comparative, comparing India to the Midwest. I compared a lot of their farming practices, whether they were sustainable or unsustainable. I also compared the demographics of whether it was men or women doing most of the farming, and whether it was small-scale or large-scale farming. In the end, I compared if they were economically based or production-based. Cultivation practices in the Midwest and domestic commensality are interconnected. Farms in the Midwest started with families. These family farms passed down the farms through their children and their grandchildren. This also passes down family traditions. These gender roles created through family farms meant that men were out working the farm, so women were possibly out working in the kitchen. This shows from production to consumption, there's culture throughout. These values are learned through the cultivation into the mealtime, where everyone sits down to eat their meals.
Now, I would like to discuss how childhood development happens through commensal practices in the United States and how this topic ties in to the ones previously discussed. Eating food is thought of as a function of survival, something that is required for our very life and health. But food is so much more than that. It is the opportunity to gather together with friends and family to connect through a common meal. Eating is characterized as a function that transcends biology and holds a key role of socialization throughout our societies. Commensality is part of every meal, no matter how simple. The basic structure of eating together for common meals exemplifies the power of food to unite all types of people. Around the globe, people share meals in unique ways, with unique approaches to the process. The people, practices, roles, and foods involved in these processes characterize domestic commensality. America is commonly referred to as a mosaic of cultures and ethnic diversity. We are surrounded by a multitude of rich experiences in every neighborhood, city, and state. It's hard to precisely understand the structuring of commensality in America. What does unite American culture is the social, political, economic, and historical context in which we are living. Commonly referred to as Western culture, some fundamental ideals include democracy, globalization, technological advances, pop culture, and even fast food. These principles influence us all the time, from education to media to entertainment and finally food. Their pressures have shifted how the typical American family shares a meal. Families rooted in traditional culture are influenced by these new Western attitudes and practices, attributable to our shared social context. The United States is an industrialized society whose mealtime patterns are formed around schedules of work, school, and life activities. For the sake of this research, I looked at the development of the nuclear family in the United States and the dinner time practices associated with them. In a study of families across the United States of all sorts, Jeffrey Sobol and Mary Nelson found that the nuclear family dominated the composition of reported commensal units, and at dinners, which are the most important meal of the day, people reported doing most of their eating with spouses or children. Despite an increase in extra-familial interest in their daily lives, dinner time is a classic opportunity for families to rejoin after a hectic day. At the core of it, sharing food involves intimacy, nurturance, and reciprocity, making it a vital tool for developing children who grow from passive eaters to independence with unique approaches to food. As it turns out, the dinner table is a cultural site that helps us understand familial relationships and analyze how children change and develop from youth into early adulthood. Ox, Smith, and Taylor performed a study in 1989 regarding American family dinner times in the 1980s. Their study revealed changing values of commensality due to standardization of American culture in families, and they found that children and mothers would occasionally eat dinner before a father, or that children would eat before both parents. In this case, they also saw that children ate in a more relaxed fashion, like in front of a TV. When families did eat together, children finished eating quickly and wanted to leave the table as soon as possible. Even though people want to enjoy sharing a meal, that doesn't mean they're always able to. And this study reveals what standardized Western culture has come to look like for the typical American family. We continue to prioritize busier, more successful lifestyles. As Americans, regardless of race, we see the principles reflected all around us in media, commercials, and general advertising. Now, having acknowledged how Western values have molded the mealtime structure, there are certain connections that can be drawn from interactions at the table. These values are especially apparent in children. Some of the biggest impacts of mealtime socialization on a child are teaching them valuable communication and language skills, developing an understanding of social hierarchies and social standards, building relationships, and so much more. Next time you gather with family or friends over food, recognize the connections and skills that are being refined during those moments. We need to continue to value social eating and understand the crucial role it has played in our lives. From an anthropological perspective, food is so much more than just a biological necessity, and it must be thought of holistically. An unexpected side effect to domestic commensality is the effect dinner time interactions have on developing basic social skills in children and building relationships. In the midst of our increasingly busy lifestyles, the norms concerning the way that families eat meals is changing greatly. More families need to continue to recognize the importance of family dinners, and the westernization of this country has had an enormous impact on how mealtimes are structured. Traditional family practices have changed with social context in which we are living, But regardless of these changes, mealtimes will persist in being cultural sites that mold the minds of young kids. The evolving values and skills that children learn will carry with them into adolescence and eventually adulthood, when their own children will go through the same experiences they once did. Communication is easily one of the most important life skills that we use in every aspect of our lives as both children and adults. Teaching children effective communication skills at a young age is imperative and encourages them to begin passing information to others and to process reciprocated communications. The table serves as an opportunity for these skills to be practiced and encourages children into a variety of communicative roles, but it simultaneously teaches them language skills. When at the dinner table, a study of family dinner time discussions in New England found that children produced at least 1/3 of the dialogue. This shows that whether a child likes discussions about their day or gets bored hearing adults talk, they are learning how to interact and listen to others, both actively and passively. In doing this, they are subjected to an array of socio-cultural expectations surrounding their language. Eleanor Ochs identified these interactions in 2 ways: direct and indirect communicative strategies. With direct communication, children are taught through directive actions such as assessments of learning or error corrections in their speech. The secondary approach, indirect communicative strategies, is instilling normalized American language cues through vague mannerisms and figures of speech that occur in conversations. Examples of this include use of metaphors, inferences, and noticeable or awkward silences. In having simple conversations with parents and their siblings, such as prayers, planning events at the table, or storytelling, children grow their language and communication skills whether they are wholly involved in the conversation or not. Just as the table is an important place to learn concrete language and communication skills, it is also a place where children are exposed to the unspoken nuances of the hierarchy. Just as the table is an important place to learn concrete language and communication skills, it is also a place where children are exposed to the unspoken nuances of the hierarchies and social standards embedded in the society they are living. The typical mealtime structure reveals social positions and expectations. Children learn, through table association, the social position of elders and thus their lower social position in relation to those of their family. Claude Fischler acknowledged the table setup referred to as the English style. This style considers that the end of the table spot for the authority figure, or parent, while middle-class sides of the table are reserved for either guests or, in a colloquial setting, children. Gender roles and age are dominating factors in social hierarchies, and these two factors present themselves at the dinner table and are reflective of long-standing and traditional roles of individuals that have been ingrained into American life. Through simple table arrangements, children are already subject to absorb societal rules based on the context they are living. They learn general practices accepted by society relating to food distribution and consumption. For example, in an American household, it is emphasized that children should leave enough food for the whole family. However, in a study of a family in Italy, researchers saw that parents took priority of their children and just took what food they wanted. Some rules are typical of an American family, but as seen through the Italian motives, individual cultures change this expectation. The dinner table is also a place where children learn general social standards and maintain these. The manners they learn are unique to societal standards in America and set social boundaries that will hold true for the rest of their lives. Gillian Crowther identified how mannerisms learned provide an unspoken agreement for civil eating and insinuate polite and cultural rules of eating. Manners learned display culturally accepted views of cleanliness, and some examples of these mannerisms that young children in the United States are taught include the use of utensils when eating and chewing with your mouth closed. America is a mosaic of cultures and ethnic backgrounds, and hundreds of unique customs present themselves in communities and affect how mealtimes are structured. Individual communities emphasize the continuation of traditional foods and behaviors, which contradicts the habits discussed of a typical Western family. Noting this, it is commonly known that individual cultures have specific rituals and traditions that are unique to mealtime preparation and eating habits. There is no denying these exist in every niche community and household. In fact, a study by Jeffrey Sobel and Mary Nelson found that adults of ethnic minorities had a higher report rate of eating in homes of extended family members. This agrees with the notion that ethnic kinships and traditions in the U.S. are strengthened through the sharing of food. However, in my research, I found that these habits are slowly disappearing, and more globally cultured families are falling into the same generalized stereotypes that one might think about the traditional American family, the stereotypes I've discussed earlier. As families immigrate to the United States, it is not uncommon to lose practice of traditions that they once held in preparing meals as a family. A study from 2015 looked at the loss of mealtime rituals amongst Hispanic women as they migrated to the United States. Researchers interviewed Hispanic females ages 27 to 40 and found that they recounted traditions that had since been lost since establishing their own families in the U.S. One woman described how when she lived in Mexico, food procurement and preparation was often done with her grandmother. She would go to the grocery store and butcher each day to get fresh ingredients, and they would cook together, as well as eat with their extended family. Now, it is a common practice for her to shop alone, not with her children, and prepare the meal by herself. And if she decides that they have time to eat as a family, it is solely with her immediate family. As a child, she was already learning the familial values of her culture and understanding roles of individuals in her community. This is something that was lost when she immigrated and helps understand that through the Americanization of a family, many traditional rituals can easily be lost simply due to a new changed environment, daily routines, and the influences of her surroundings. A new generation of children will grow up learning a completely different set of rules, behaviors, and expectations surrounding mealtimes and society. Taking an anthropological approach, it is important that with all of our projects, we took a holistic view at the various roles food plays in our lives and how these roles can come together. Looking into the lives of cultures and countries through data supplementation, ethnographic studies, and the synthesization of these sources, we were able to create connections and conclusions that would not have been previously thought of before. We addressed research in comparison to not only individual perspectives for our own projects, but also amongst all three projects, all while maintaining cultural relativity. To wrap it up, we want to finish by reinforcing the connections between our topics. At first glance, they don't seem to be connected, but they all look into how we can maintain tradition and cultural practices while simultaneously bettering our future. Beginning with hydroponics, which is directly concerned with the production of food. This topic looks into change the ways we cultivate to create more sustainable and efficient options. It asks the question that how are our cultivation practices impacting the planet and our lives, from waste to effectiveness to yields? Are we being the most productive versions of our cultivating? That ties directly in with the cultivation practices in the Midwest and India. As we saw, the traditional methods of cultivation are designed around the culture and communities they exist in. However, we saw that in both places, there are sustainable and unsustainable options that impact not only the community, but have a far-reaching span to the food and where it travels. Are our current methods good enough for the environment and the food we eat? This being said, as we create more sustainable cultivation methods, unique processes and practices will continue to endure even as sustainability increases, just due to the fact that they are built on tradition and cultural standards. Domestic commensality and childhood development ties into both these things because it shows that food traditions are changing. Different food traditions are displayed relative to individual cultures, all the way from production to consumption, and the impacts that those two processes have not only directly impact workers and people eating the food, but have a far-reaching span, even so far down to what children are learning and the values society is teaching them. Lastly, a big connection we found between all three of these topics was the future of foodscapes, how we produce food, how we have produced food, how are we changing consumption patterns, and how do these changing consumption patterns impact values? By creating more sustainable options, how will this impact the dinner table? And thus, how will children interpret the society they're growing up in? Thank you.